Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy for the invitation for this great conference, and I think it's a very timely one because, as we all know, the countries in the Middle East, the region as a whole, has been in an ongoing transformation. Maybe we thought that the Arab revolutions of 2011 there were some setbacks during the way, but now, as we can see with the events in Algeria and Sudan, and maybe potentially in other countries like even Tunisia, so it's still, I consider it as an ongoing process. My talk will be about Tunisia actually, and the recent attacks, actually, I would say, on the democratization of the country. So it was a successful model, actually a successful example of the democratization, as we all, or many of us, thought during the Arab revolutions, when the revolution started in Tunisia. And it was also a different one in many regards. Maybe we can sum up with like 5 aspects that why Tunisia was different. First, there were strong democratic institutions, and secondly, there was a non-violent regime change. And then in the aftermath, there was the inclusionary democratization. Maybe we didn't see in some of the other similar examples. And there was a very well-functioning civil society, which was very vibrant and very diverse. And there were, in the beginning, little interference of the foreign actors, but maybe along the way it increased later on. So after the revolutionary uprisings and the changes in Tunisia, then of course difficulties started to emerge, and there were of course maybe even from the past the corruption issues and economic inequalities and domestic political fragmentation among the parties, and increasing foreign interference, unfortunately, and of course the recent attacks on democratic institutions. During the last 2 years, the Tunisian revolution, I think, has been witnessing the most serious threat to its hardly achieved gains for more than a decade. And the suspension of the parliament, of course, was a very unlucky event, I would say, and this was, in fact, unfortunately, the decision was taken by a constitutional law professor, who became the president of the country, and it was quite a surprise for many, even those who supported him during the election campaign. So it was an unexpected move for many, and so now Tunisia, of course, later on, the arrest and the other pressure on civil society organizations, and so now Tunisia has been going through a very difficult situation. So here, of course, normally I'm not very fan of not very fan of the external players' involvement in the Middle Eastern politics, especially the United States. But of course, we cannot neglect the fact that the United States has been a major player in the political processes in the region, whether we like it or not. So, of course, then there is the responsibility for the US to play, and also not only the US now, because as maybe we can discuss later on, that the Middle East is not the Middle East as of like a decade ago or maybe 2 decades ago, because we have maybe if we talk about the Middle East 2 decades ago, the major and maybe the only external actor we could say was the United States. But then now we have other actors that have increasing involvement with the Middle Eastern countries, whether be it in an economic way or maybe in a political and diplomatic or militarily, as Ms. Sarah mentioned also. So we have to take these actors into consideration as well. And also some of the domestic, not domestic, but local actors in the Middle East are not like the ones, not like they used to be. Most of them being Turkey in my regard, and also some other actors like Qatar or the United Arab Emirates. So these actors are maybe, we can say that the new game changers in the Middle Eastern political arena, and we cannot neglect their existence and their influence in the Middle Eastern political environment. And of course, some other global actors like China and also Russia, still they are becoming more and more relevant, even with some of the very traditional allies of the United States. Russia can have an increasing engagement and in economy and in military affairs with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, and also China is the same. So these are the new international actors dynamic of the Middle East. So here, if we come back to the United States role in the Tunisian political processes, of course, the United States, as we know, has supported the values of democracy. Normally, in its own, maybe from time to time, it might have its own democratic problems, but still, from the past, and if you look at the historical processes, that we've seen that it's been supporting, in some cases, democratic processes. Maybe in the case of Middle East, there was some problems as well in that regard, because I remember that during the early months of the Arab Revolution process, and also during the 2013 coup in Egypt, of course, the record of the United States was not very welcomed by the actors in the Middle East who aspire for more democratic transformation in the region, and also who thought that the United States can contribute in that regard. So, apart from these maybe cases, of course, I think the United States should be prioritizing supporting democratic processes in the region, rather than, of course, it might be naive to not to prioritize its own interests, but of course, in the same time, we have to talk about whether these interests lie on the United States support for the democracy. So we have to, I think, discuss this a little bit more, and I think it is more in United States interest to have democratic democratic regimes in the region, because maybe also in that regard, one note I can make is that as we've seen during the events in Algeria and Sudan and also the Arab Revolution countries, that there might be and there can be some unexpected events, some unexpected popular uprisings still that can take place in the region. So in order to have people's support and people's positive positive perception in the region, the US should focus on more supporting the democratic processes in the region. So, and which ways, of course, when we talk about how can the United States support the democratic processes, of course, it can. The most important factor here is the diplomatic pressure on the governments or regimes who are not very friendly, if you can say, to democratization processes. And then the civil society aspect, of course, it is very important, and the US should continue supporting the civil society. And even, for instance, maybe a different remark here is that, but even in Turkey, the United States support for some of the civil society organizations are very visible, and despite, of course, maybe it it contradicts from time to time with the Turkish government's priorities, or maybe very critical organizations to Turkish government are getting support from the United States. And I think it is also very normal for a democratic setting, because it is enhancing the democratic participation and democratic discussions in the country, and I think it is one way or another, it is a positive aspect. And one thing maybe we can also mention, that the United States can work with those other international organizations like African Union, European Union, because these two organizations are very related in the case of Tunisia, because Tunisia is a member of African Union, and also the deterioration of the situation in Tunisia might directly affect the European countries. And I think there is a serious concern in the European side of things getting even more unstable in Tunisia, because then there might be some other repercussions like migration waves and also the economic migrations and other issues. So, and also, of course, there might be again kind of emerging or re-emerging of some terror groups that can originate from the country, or that can come from other countries to Tunisia. And this can all be relevant when we talk about Tunisia, because more and more what we've seen, that also when I talk to some colleagues from Tunisia, that this political crisis and the government's undemocratic moves, when they are joined by the economic difficulties, then they more and more talk about some kind of popular uprising again. So there is the possibility of such uprising, and I think this is a serious threat to the also European partners of the European Union. And also, as I said maybe in the beginning, that the United States can work with its allies in the region, like Turkey, or maybe Qatar, or maybe other also actors, to promote democracy, because whether, of course, with all its shortcomings, that Turkey has the most successful democratic system in the Middle East, and it's been for many Arabs, actually it's been an example of an aspiring democracy, prosperous, and I think this can be some contribution to the US efforts if it wants to promote democratic processes in Tunisia. And finally, establishing democracy in Tunisia necessitates a comprehensive and long-term strategy that tackles the country's economic, social, and political issues, let alone the support from the external players, but it is also about the country itself. So the actors and the parties inside the country should really consider democratization as their first agenda. So, but given the current administration, of course, it is a bit naive to consider that it is their first agenda, but this can be achieved by the social pressure from the bottom up, and also some pressure from maybe some international actors as well. And of course here maybe there can be more discussions how it can be, but the United States can play a role in that regard. And this can be not only supportive of the Tunisian democracy, also such an attitude by the United States can help the US to ameliorate its diminishing image across the masses in the wider Middle East, because this is, I think, during the last decade, if I can say, I mean, since the Arab Revolution's process, the US image in the Middle East has deteriorated gravely, not only in Turkey, but in all the Middle Eastern regions, and I think the US should do more to ameliorate this image, and I think supporting the democratization process in Tunisia can serve to this aim as well.